front pages. Many of the papers focus on the tensions between central government and local leaders over those proposed increased COVID restrictions.
Joining us from Kent is broadcaster Iain Dale, and former Labour Home Secretary Jacqui Smith joins us from North London this morning. Good morning to both of you. Let's take a look then at this whole standoff first of all. Iain, what do you make of this? Because government is trying to impose these Tier 3 restrictions on Greater Manchester. The local leaders there are saying, no, we're not having any of it. How is this going to be resolved, do you think?
It's very difficult to see how it is going to be resolved amicably. I think what will happen is that the measures will be imposed, possibly later today or over the weekend, by central government. And in a way, this is the worst of all worlds for Boris Johnson and particularly his party, because they've spent the last 15, 20 years trying to rebuild the reputation of the Conservative Party in the north, the northwest, the northeast. And of course, Boris Johnson won his majority of 80 seats, largely because he won seats all over the north of England. And that was only in December last year. So for this to be built up now as a battle between the south and the north and the Conservative government, and particularly the northwest, Jake Berry, who's previously been a very close ally of Boris Johnson, he's an MP in the northwest. He has said that Boris Johnson should be very careful for what he wishes for, because if all of those red wall seats go at the next election, that could precipitate a defeat for the Conservatives. And it's interesting that when you look at the coalition of politicians in the northwest who've spoken out against this, it does include, I think, all of the Conservative MPs. I interviewed Graham Brady, the MP for Altrincham and Sale, last night. And I said, well, if Boris Johnson goes ahead with this, will you speak out against it? And he said, absolutely, I will. So there's a lot of ill feeling here. It is partly being whipped up by Andy Burnham, who is in a slightly tricky position in that he agrees with Keir Starmer's policy of a national lockdown, but doesn't agree that those very same measures should be introduced in his own area, which I think is a slightly odd position.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because our viewers are very divided, as you could argue the COVID restrictions are very divided. I mean, his point is, isn't it, is that he doesn't want the North to be used as a testing ground, that if they're trying out this three-tier system, he's used as a testing ground. But our viewers are divided, Jacqui, this morning. Some saying, good on Andy Burnham, at last somebody doing what an opposition should do, challenging the government, holding it to account, challenging the science. Others saying, actually, do you know what? He may have to be held responsible for COVID deaths if his message of challenge leads to people not following the rules.
Well, what Andy Burnham is saying, and let's not forget, he is responsible for the economic well-being and the health and well-being of the Greater Manchester area as the elected mayor for that area. And what he's saying is, look, I was one of the first people to argue for lockdown, and he criticised the government for not bringing in measures early enough in March. He wanted more measures at various other times. But he's saying we've had measures in place in Greater Manchester. They don't appear to have worked, but we do know they're having an economic impact. And if you want us to be locked down in the way in which you're suggesting, frankly, you've got to put a bit more support into our local economy so that we don't end up taking all of the safety measures to protect, in some ways, the whole of the country, but actually specifically taking a particular economic hit that you're not compensating us for. I think he's doing exactly what you would expect a mayor to do, representing the economy and health of the people that elected him.
It's a good political play, though, for him, isn't it? I mean, that's the accusation, that it's party politics here as well.
Well, as Iain has rightly pointed out, actually, of course, he is supported by Conservative MPs in the Greater Manchester area as well. So this is not about playing party politics. Yes, it's about politics, because politics is about representing the people who elected you and trying to make things work. And what we know is that the provisions that the government has put in place up until now are not working. So something different needs to happen. And Andy is saying, look, actually, we need financial support if you're going to expect us to go under these sorts of pretty heavy lockdown provisions. That's the right thing to do, isn't it, surely? And I think he, along with other mayors and the opposition, is also saying, well, you know, what we need probably now to do is to actually all of us take a break and make sure we've got in place the thing that really would make a difference, and that's a functioning test and trace system. And this week we've heard that actually the test and trace system is tracing an even smaller proportion of people than it had previously been. So you government who are responsible for that, get that sorted out and stop expecting people, particularly in the north of the country, to take the pain for your incompetence.
I mean, Iain, is there a point there? You know, Andy Burnham was talking about the financial support not being there. He says it's gambling with people's jobs. Some of the poorest people in the country will be asked to accept a 2/3 cut in wages, but national government have said that the money just isn't available. If they do then go and impose this, how difficult is that going to be? Because there's going to be a lot of resentment, isn't there? Are people going to follow these guidelines?
I think there is a lot of dangerous talk going on here, and all this, it's on the front pages of a couple of the newspapers, that the Northwest is being used as some sort of experiment by the government. No, these measures are being brought in because the infection rates in those areas are the highest in the country. That's why they're being brought in. It's not about experimentation. Look, financial measures, up to now, I think the government has done, I think most people would agree, and Jacqui has paid tribute to them for this. I think the furlough programme, the business loan scheme, that was far more than anyone ever thought a Conservative government would do in terms of intervening. Now, the replacement for the furlough scheme is not as generous, and nobody denies that. And I think when you talk about paying 2/3 of somebody's salary who's on minimum wage, we're talking about £5.84 an hour. And of course, government ministers have got into a bit of trouble this week when they've naturally been asked, well, could you live on £5.84 an hour? It's a question interviewers always love to ask politicians. But the fact is, there would be an awful lot of people in an awful lot of financial trouble if they don't actually provide maybe extra help in that kind of area.
In London, of course, Tier 2 comes into play. A different relationship, we understand, between the mayor there and government, that, in fact, he was pushing for stricter measures out of concern. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what we heard. And, of course,
yeah.
it is true, yeah. So why would he not be pushing for that? Why would he not be pushing for support for London? What is the difference?
Sorry, just to be clear, Kate, as I suggested earlier on, Andy Burnham pushed for tight measures earlier than the government actually introduced them. So I don't think this is an argument between those who think there should be tight measures and those who think there shouldn't be. I think this is about...
But it doesn't appear that the London mayor is pushing for the same money and in the same way.
I think he has, true. Of course, they're talking about a different level of lockdown provisions in London, so only going to Tier 2 as opposed to Tier 3. But of course, you yourself have reported this morning the argument that appears to be going on between government and the mayor about support for Transport for London, which is really under quite a lot of pressure at the moment. So sometimes these arguments happen in front of the cameras and sometimes they happen behind the cameras. I suspect there are quite a lot of detailed arguments and discussions going on about where the support is going to go.
Are there going to be arguments about one of the implications of the increased measures in London, and that is last orders for MPs, no alcohol served in the Commons? Jacqui, out of interest, have you ever known there to be zero alcohol available in Westminster?
Whether this sets a precedent.
I was very insulted about the idea that you felt that I was the expert on drinking.
Well, only because you've worked there
for so many years. That was the only reason, Jacqui, that we thought you'd be a good person to consult on this.
Basically, they're saying you're a lush.
They are. They are.
With your expertise, do you know whether this has ever happened before?
As far as I can remember, there never was a time during the period when I was in Parliament, the 13 years that I was in Parliament, when the bars were closed, as far as I can remember. And
you were too wasted to remember.
It does seem that it is a sensible thing for Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, to have done now.
I suspect some MPs will miss it, though, and I'm wondering as well if you're going to need a stiff drink, because, of course, it's your debut on Strictly, isn't it, Charlotte?
It is.
This Saturday. How do you feel about it?
I'm having the time of my life. It is absolutely brilliant. We're in proper training now for the first live dance, which is going to be happening a week on Saturday. So we've actually recorded the show that is going out tomorrow. And all I can say is my dancing's already better. than it will be on the show tomorrow. The main use of alcohol, as far as I'm concerned at the moment, is rubbing it into my aching feet because, you know, my poor old body, it's taking a battering. But I have to say, even the youngsters on the show are also physically suffering. So it's not just us oldies who are under the cosh, but we are all absolutely loving it. And I think for all of the reasons we've talked about, a bit of sparkle and a bit of dance is what the country needs now.
It's exactly what we need at the moment. So do you find out, or do we find out, you obviously know already because you've recorded it already, who you'll be dancing with, who your partner is?
Tomorrow, all will be revealed as to who my partner is. Yes.
Are you pleased?
I think I know who it is.
Oh, Iain, go on, over to you.
Go on,
Breaking
Iain, spill the
news.
beans.
Well, I think I know who it is because you have to look at who keeps liking Jacqui's tweets.
Oh.
That's the clue.
You've been doing some
I think
detective
it's a
work.
social
She
media
hasn't told me.
investigation.
She won't tell me.
Go on then, you can tell us. There's only
No,
a
I
few
couldn't
people
possibly
watching,
do
I'm
that.
sure.
It doesn't know.
I don't actually know its name.
Don't
but,
worry, Iain.
You
There's
know
somebody
it's
on
somebody
it
who keeps
right
liking
now.
her tweets.
Right, we'll take that lead and we'll investigate it and we'll report back imminently. So thanks for the tip-off, Iain. We'll do some homework and see what we can come up with on that one. But Jacqui, we look forward to seeing you in action. Best of luck.
Thank you.
It's going to be
Thank
great
you.
fun, and for Rambo too, of course. We cannot wait. Lovely to talk to both of you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.